The FDA, well, I think their status quo days are numbered, and I think they may know that because a big announcement from the FDA just came in. What are they doing? Well, we'll go to Stat News. FDA bans red dye number 3 in foods decades after additive found to cause cancer in rats. They're so worried about this that they're going to wait till 2027 to actually get this out of the food. Remember, we reported a
Oh my
couple of
God.
weeks ago,
Is that how this
35
works?
years. Yeah.
We're on it. We're on it. We're going to do it. We're fast tracking it for 2027. We got to move
Yeah.
that up. We definitely got more work to do.
So 35 years after they found it caused cancer, they took it out of cosmetics. They finally got around to getting it out of the food, well, because of a complicated bureaucratic process, said Consumer Reports. But that's what's happening there. And the FDA is not done there. They're going to revolutionize healthcare in the next 5 days before the next transition team gets in. You just wait. Here's the recent headline: FDA proposes putting ready nutrition info on the front of food packages. There it is. Our
Wow.
health problems are solved. So that's where we're at
We're
the
not hiding
FDA.
anymore. All right,
That's
great.
right. So now let's talk about food for a second. So in 19, just to give a little context here, in 1971, there was a gentleman named Earl Butz. Nixon tapped him to become the Secretary of Agriculture. What he did, look at this New York Times article, 1971. U.S. will buy corn to raise prices. They subsidized corn for all the farmers and basically small farmers were put out of business for the most part. It was go big or go home. There was this huge influx of corn in the United States. And what did they do with that? We look at this chart from the USDA, and this is the pounds per person and dry weight of sugar, basically sweeteners. And you can see their corn 1970. You can see it just shoots right up, and it's been really bumping at that line ever since 29 up to 2019, which is as far as this chart goes. So corn sweeteners are what has been being put in foods. It's a cheap alternative. There's an abundance of it. And this is where you get the high fructose corn syrup and all of the processed foods causing a lot of the health issues. Well, a new study just came out, and this was in Nature. And the title of this study is Dietary Fructose Enhances Tumor Growth Indirectly via Interorgan Lipid Transfer. So it's interesting here. It says, here we show that fructose supplementation enhances tumor growth in animal models of melanoma, breast cancer, and cervical cancer without causing weight gain or insulin resistance. But it's interesting here because we've always been told that cancer feeds off sugar. So it eats the sugar and it grows. Well, this study, rather than just finding some correlations here, it actually found a mechanism. This is what's interesting about this. So it goes on to say the cancer cells themselves were unable to use fructose readily as a nutrient because they did not express ketohexokinase C. That's the main enzyme that metabolizes fructose. So the cancer cells don't have this enzyme, so they're not using sugar. So how are they growing? Well, we go into another article here from the same organization, same Nature. The liver converts fructose into lipids to fuel tumors. It says fructose aids tumor growth, but cancer cells usually lack the enzymes needed to metabolize this sugar. The liver converts dietary fructose to lipids that enter the blood, and cancer cells use the lipids to make membranes for proliferation. Now that's metastasizing. That's what they're using here. So we have this mechanism now of fructose, high fructose on top of that is supercharging this process. And it's in so much of these processed foods that this is one of the big alarm bells that should be raising for everybody. And obviously the cancer conversation is so multifaceted. There's so many inputs to this. And I know people out there right now are wringing their fists going, turbo cancer, the vaccines, yes, there's so many factors, but the high fructose corn syrup and the sugars and the sweeteners cannot be overlooked. This is a multifaceted approach that we have, some heavy lifting we have to do. In this next 4 years, if we have this window of opening, this should all be looked at. And it's not just a couple cancers here or there. We also have colon cancer. This is Scientific America. The colon cancer conundrum is the title of the article. And it says this: in the US, people born in the 1950s have the lowest incidence of colorectal cancer, and rates rise from there. Someone who is 41 today has a 47% higher risk of colorectal cancer than someone who was 41 in 1991. Over those 30 years, the rate increased from 10.6 to 15.6 people per 100,000. In other words, the risk goes up with every subsequent generation and travels with those individuals as they age, something known as the birth cohort effect. Now, this should not be happening, not
Wow.
only in our country, but any country. We do not want to pass disease, greater burdens of disease to every generation as we go on. what's going on here. So
Well, I mean, and think
another
about it. I mean, all of that's happening while we're getting exams you never got back in the 1950s, right? Everyone's going in for their colorectal exams at, 50 years old or whatever. But now it's even getting younger. I know people under the age of 50 that are having issues. We never saw that before. I mean, it just basically, what is going on?
And so for colorectal cancer specifically, there's this term. It's called the Warburg effect, and this was basically showing that this inflammation is it's kind of like a wound that doesn't heal in the gut. And some new research is putting a spotlight on maybe a really key point to that. And this is the headline here: ultra processed foods high in seed oils could be fueling colon cancer risk. So these researchers, they looked at the omega-6 oils. That's what we're talking about, the high in seed oils. Those are canola, corn, grapeseed, sunflower. And they're suggesting that they're showing that the omega-6 fatty acids, if there's an overabundance of those, that actually continues the inflammation. It doesn't allow the inflammation, the wound, so to speak, to heal. And so they're showing that if you could actually balance that and have more omega-3s, which is the fish oils, that actually turns off or it starts to shift that inflammation towards a healing process. And what's interesting, and obviously it's not just easy as fix your omega-3 and omega-6 ratios and you won't have cancer, but this is a key process in inflammation. And there's something called resolution medicine. These researchers are actually talking about just by switching your diet, your risk is actually going to lower by having lower inflammatory foods, but especially this oil balance and cutting out those seed oils, those canolas, and all of those things in the ultra processed foods is a big step to cutting out that inflammation. But then, if you're reading New York Times, you may not know what is actually happening here because a lot of people are turning to health and saying, this is something we should really look at here. The medical industrial complex, we really should take a close look at that. But New York Times, nah, have Americans ever really been healthy is the title. So lower your expectations, Americans. You were never really that healthy to begin with. So that movement you're trying to do for, health, yeah, you really were kind of sick all along. So don't get your
I mean, it's the
expectations up too
same.
high.
I mean, God, they have no new plays in mainstream media, mainstream medicine. Same argument as autism's always been here in consistent prevalence. We're just diagnosing it better. In this case, you've always been sick. You just didn't know it. It flies in face of the science that you and I have both talked about for years, which is we had 12.8% chronic illness, which is, different forms of inflammation, whether it's a neurological disorder from brain swelling or an autoimmune disease from inflammation and your own immune system attacking itself. We were at 12.4% in the 1980s. We're at more than 50 now. We stopped doing this graph in 2011. It was at 54%. They're arguing that it's probably around 60% where they're not really sharing the data as well anymore. We know it's gotten worse. But look at that. Just bring it up for a second. I want everyone, this should be burned into your mind. 1980s to the 2000s. So, in however you want to look at that, 20 or 40 years where we're at now, look at that decline. 12.8% to 54% chronic illness, really 60%. That's the greatest decline you're witnessing right there in human health on an issue like chronic illness. Chronic illness meaning for some reason your body doesn't know how to live on this planet anymore. And for some reason you're allergic to too many things or allergic to your own cells in your own body. You are de-evolving. Your evolution has led you to a place in a very short period of time where your own immune system is attacking you. Something has gone terribly wrong, and when they say it's always been this way, that's when you should have a red flag. You're lying or you are stupid. There's no in-between space there.